What's up, guys? This is like my third time recording this because, the world we live in, we can't speak frankly. We can only speak politically correctly for the most part. And, it looks like we have a black enlightenment. The beginnings, the inklings of some kind of rudimentary black enlightenment. And recall it was starting in the 1950s. Most white people started going to therapy, started reading books about understanding themselves better, psychotherapy, psychoanalysis, understanding what's going on inside their head that they're not necessarily aware of, what's going on subconsciously, where their biases and their bigotries are, how to become a better person, how not to blame everybody else for your own problems, what's going on when you engage in psychological projection, blaming other people for your own problems. And then in the 1950s, we also saw dramatic improvements in race relations and the civil rights movement and civil rights laws, right? That all stemmed in part, yes, through black hard work on those issues, but also through this white cultural self-awareness, self-discovery, self-criticism leading to progress. That's how progress happens. Through work, through uncomfortable self-examination. And we know in the black community that, understanding yourself, criticizing yourself is frowned upon. Criticizing the black community, frowned upon. Calling for them to do better is frowned upon. The only thing that's not frowned upon is engaging in psychological projection, encouraging the black people to blame everybody else for their problems, and pretending that there's nothing wrong with 75% of black kids born out of wedlock. Pretend that there's nothing wrong with teenage pregnancy. Pretend that there's nothing wrong with the typical single-parent black family household. Pretend that there's nothing wrong with not reporting criminals to the police. Pretend there's nothing wrong with not wanting to see criminals off the streets so that healthy, happy families can prosper and nurture and be developed so that these kids can show up for school on their first day without lifelong severe post-traumatic stress disorder and emotional damage that is going to prevent them from day one of school from ever excelling in school because they're too emotionally screwed up from their immediate nuclear family and from the community around them. So anyway, we got a bunch of quotes here, and it started with DeMar DeRozan and Kevin Love talking about their mental health issues. And by all these NBA players talking about their mental health issues, it's going to have a huge impact in the black community. And it's going to become more and more okay to talk about your problems, to seek help for your problems, and through seeking help for your problems and reading more about what you might be going through on the internet and talking with people on the internet. This is what drives. This is what drives progress. This is what drives self-improvement. This is what drives radical enlightenment and radical changes in attitudes and behaviors. And if there's anything the black community needs right now, it's radical change in attitudes and behaviors. And so this is wonderful, guys. We got Marcus Morris. Marcus saying, only Marcus felt comfortable to talk about his mental health issues, but both Morris brothers dealing with depression. Confidentiality remains a concern of NBA players, in addition to the whole stigma, right? The whole stigma of talking about mental health issues. That's why Kevin Love was, that's why Isaiah Thomas and D. Wade still gave Kevin Love all kinds of shit when he talked about his issues. So that's what needs to change. And it's leaders like this. These guys are exerting leadership. Kevin Love showed it. DeMar DeRozan showed it. Marcus Morris showing it right here. Charles Barkley showing it. Bruce Bowen. We're going to get to that. Marcus says his and Markeith's depression stems from the demons of a fractured childhood that began with 2 strikes against them, poor and black. I'm pretty sure they had more strikes than just being black and poor against them. We grew up where there were no white people. None. You just didn't see that in our neighborhood. At the time, I didn't trust any white people because I didn't know any white people. Honestly, I didn't feel like I could trust anybody Not even the people in my neighborhood or who I knew my whole life. We just walked out stressed all the time. I said to my brother once, this is no way to live. And this is the exact kind of fractured, dysfunctional, ghetto childhood that DeMar DeRozan is dealing with his depression. That's the cause of it. He's talked about that recently. He says when you move out of those war zone neighborhoods, all your problems don't just disappear. And most of these kids in most of these neighborhoods, they've got severe emotional damage from the day they start school at 5 years old. So, and we also see this is where the casual anti-white racism comes from. Pure ignorance, pure hatred, and a complete lack of awareness that nobody's teaching black kids that black people can be racist in schools or in the families in most of these neighborhoods. You know it. Sure, some black parents teach that. But way too few. In the black community right now, it's perfectly acceptable to believe that black people can't be racist. It's more than acceptable. It's the norm. It's normal. So maybe it's wishful thinking that anti-white racism will go down as more and more black people start seeking help for their emotional and psychological problems and start talking about them more. And as the stigma against mental health issues slowly declines in the black community. But it's a small step from seeking help for emotional, psychological problems. It's a small step to then realizing not only do you have these problems, and not only do you now have a better understanding of these problems, not only did you benefit from the uncomfortable process of self-examination and self-criticism and self-discovery, but the next, right along with that comes acknowledging and realizing and discovering that you can be racist, that black people can be racist, that white people are people too, and they don't deserve to be targets of racism. They don't deserve to be targets of hate crimes. They don't deserve to be targets of robbery, of intimidation. They don't deserve to be intimidated on the sidewalk. They don't deserve to be harassed. So all these race issues in the USA right now, which is the least racist country in the world, which anybody who has any understanding of the world already knows, these racial issues can be greatly diminished just from the black community process of self-discovery, self-examination, self-criticism, and realizing that their shit stinks too. And once you realize your own shit stinks, you stop screaming as loud about how somebody else's shit stinks. Because you suddenly realize everybody can be racist. And you might even realize that racism is much bigger in the black community than it is in the white community. And so all of a sudden you sit down, you be humble, you stop going to so many protests and riots, rallying against whiteness, and you start doing more to be a better leader, to be a better change maker in your own community, to drive this black enlightenment, which we may or may not be seeing the beginnings of right now. Charles Barkley says, one of the biggest problems in the African American community is none of us have fathers, so we don't have strong male figures to guide us. When I was growing up, I thought it was normal not to have a mom and dad around. Nobody I knew had both parents, and everybody I knew was poor. I thought it was normal for every black girl to be pregnant in high school. Because in my small hometown of Leeds, Alabama, that's how it was. It wasn't until I got to the NBA that I realized, wait, that's really screwed up. It's a miracle any African American player turns out okay based on where we come from. What a refreshing change from, oh, black people are such victims. Oh, poor black people. They didn't cause any of their own problems. Oh, black people don't do anything wrong. It's all white racism holding them back. as if any kid, white or black or Chinese or anything, has a better chance of succeeding in life with one parent rather than two. As if that's any kind of culture to promote or be proud of, where there's nothing but single moms. 75% of black kids grow up without fathers around. As if marriage and raising kids and a loving family is so uncool or nothing to strive for. So what a change. Some real black leadership from Charles Barkley. Marcus Morris showing it too. DeMar DeRozan as well. Bruce Bowen joining in, guys. See, it's a revolution. It's an Enlightenment revolution. And there's going to be a lot of white liberals who are not going to want to hear any of this, guys. They're going to want black people to remain as ignorant and angry and hateful and dysfunctional and violent as possible. As long as that anger is pointed at white people who stand in the way of a communist revolution. This is all bad news for some really bad people in the world, guys. But it's great news for the black community that they're talking about this. You know, if it makes you uncomfortable to talk about the shame of the 75% of black kids born without fathers, single-parent households, that shame is nothing compared to the benefits of starting to change this. 60 years ago, 20% of black kids born into single-parent families. Now it's the exact opposite. Would a little embarrassment not be worth changing black culture, making families stronger, nurturing black children better with less emotional damage, less personality disorders, less post-traumatic stress disorder, higher, healthier self-esteem, so that these black kids don't believe that material items are everything because they don't have the self-esteem to realize material items are just things and they don't even matter because they already have that self-love inside them. You know, progress comes from shame. And white people have been shamed for a long ass time. And it's basically way beyond where it ever should have been. You know, in the 1950s, when white people in the South started seeing themselves on television, engaging in discrimination or prejudice, Jim Crow culture against black people, they saw themselves on TV. They were incredibly ashamed about it. And in large numbers, they started drastically changing their attitudes and behaviors. And in the North as well, in the white community, this is what drove all these civil rights laws, guys, in addition to the black activism. It didn't just happen on its own. Just like slavery didn't end just because black people wanted it to. It was white people, guys. White people ended slavery. It was a moral revolution. So they say. Anyway, guys, you know, progress in your own personal life and in your own community, your own culture, it all starts with looking inside and pointing the finger inside and being okay with finding shortcomings, being okay with blaming yourself, having enough character to blame yourself and to change. That's what drives change in a grand scale. Everyone wants to drive change in a grand scale by pointing their fingers at somebody else. That might have made sense 60 years ago. But all you're doing is copying old tactics. And all you're doing is forgetting Martin Luther King, wanting people to just be judged on their content of their character and not the color of their skin. You're forgetting everything. You're learning all the wrong lessons. And what we're seeing here, guys, is we have the semblance of a black revolution where more and more black people are going to start seeking further personal self-awareness, self-criticism, personal growth, emotional healing, humility, seeking out people they can trust, whether they're black or white or anything else, that they can talk about their problems with, and starting to realize that trustworthiness is more important than sharing the same color of the skin. To start breaking some of these cycles. This is wonderful news, guys. And it's okay that it's coming from NBA players. Just like it's okay that LeBron James starting the school made all these selfish-ass NBA players suddenly start giving money and start thinking about somebody else but themselves. And to start wanting to make a difference to somebody else besides themselves and their own egos. So this is beautiful stuff. But you're going to have some people, even perhaps some NBA owners, who are not going to want to see this. Because for a lot of rich people, guys, it makes sense to want to keep black people down, to want to keep the single parent rate high, to want to keep black people angry and violent, fill up the prisons, and to have more radicals, to have more revolutionaries out there ready to burn down a neighborhood, burn down a whole city, the minute the powerful people tell them to. And we saw this in Ferguson, Missouri, didn't we? The media was basically telling them to burn down their whole city. And so, we live in a beautiful country in America where we have all these liberties that people take for granted. And there are people, very powerful people, who do not want America and Americans to have anywhere close to the amount of liberties, civil liberties, human rights protections that we have. And by keeping black people ignorant, violent, and totally dysfunctional, so they can be perfect foot soldiers, basically slaves, for whatever political revolution it's going to take to strip America of our freedoms. That's what they want. And so this is wonderful news for the black community and for the white community and for America in general to have a real black enlightenment. And if it's led by NBA players, it's perfectly okay. Pretty soon you'll see more and more black people not wanting to study African studies and to start wanting to study real academic subjects that aren't just staring and studying their own belly button, but studying the rest of the world and studying where black people fit in to the rest of the world and thinking about people in general and not just black people and not just black victimhood. It's wonderful. And that's how you can actually get a real job too. Anyway, guys, let me know what you think about all this stuff. Bruce Bowen too. You can pause it and read this. But we are in the beginnings of a black enlightenment. It's wonderful. NBA. Gotta love it. I'll see ya. Peace.